The year was 1843. The carriage wheels groaned and rattled, kicking up dust from the uneven road that led to Black Hollow. Inside, Jonathan Hale, a scholar from Boston, peered through the grimy window. He was here to study the folklore of this isolated village, a place tucked away between dense forests and hills perpetually shrouded in mist. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, and the distant rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer was the only sign of life. But there was a profound stillness here, an unnatural quiet that hung in the air like a shroud. Even the crows seemed to give the village a wide berth, circling high above, but never landing. As the carriage rumbled closer, a knot of unease tightened in Jonathan's chest. Villagers began to emerge from their simple timber-framed homes. They didn't smile or wave. They just stared, their eyes vacant and distant, as if looking right through him. Their greetings were murmured, devoid of any warmth, before they shuffled back into the shadows of their doorways. The carriage stopped before the inn. It was a weather-beaten, sagging structure, its sign creaking mournfully in the wind, the hollow hearth. Jonathan stepped down, his boots sinking into the muddy ground. He pushed open the heavy door and was greeted by the scent of damp woods, stale ale, and something else. Something like old unwashed linens. A single, weak fire sputtered in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows that made the room feel alive and menacing. Behind the counter stood a woman with gaunt, hollow cheeks and piercing grey eyes that studied him without blinking. "Travelling, are you?" she asked, her voice as flat and grey as her eyes. "Yes, Jonathan Hale," he replied, trying to muster a friendly tone. "I've come to learn about your village, its stories, its legends." She gave a single, sharp nod. "You'll find Black Hollow is a place best left alone," she stated, not as a warning, but as a fact. "Rooms are upstairs, keep your candle lit, and do not, under any circumstances, wander after dark." A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air traced its way down Jonathan's spine. He forced a polite smile. Of course. That evening, Jonathan sat by the window in his small, sparse room, a quill scratching across the pages of his journal. He wrote about the strange, unwelcoming aura of the village, the unsettling emptiness in the people's eyes. As the sun bled out behind the hills, plunging the world into a heavy twilight, he heard it for the first time. A faint whispering carried on the wind. At first, he dismissed it as children playing or the wind sighing through the eaves. But the sound persisted. It wasn't words, not quite, but a soft, sibilant murmuring that seemed to seep right through the walls of the inn. His scholarly curiosity quickly overcame his caution. Lighting his lantern, he crept from his room and ventured into the village's narrow, twisting alleys. The whispering grew louder here, tantalizingly close to forming words, yet always just out of reach of his understanding. The sound drew him onward, away from the flickering lights of the few occupied homes, toward the edge of the forest. The trees stood like skeletal sentinels at the border of civilization, their branches gnarled and claw-like. In a small clearing, just beyond the last fence post, he saw it. A figure cloaked and hunched over, as if gathering herbs or roots from the damp earth. "Hello there," Jonathan called out, his voice sounding small and thin in the oppressive quiet. The figure froze. Then, with an agonizing slowness, it turned. Its face was a pale, almost translucent oval in the gloom, its eyes dark, hollow pits that seemed to absorb the lantern's light and pierce right through him. Before he could utter another word, it simply vanished. It didn't run. It melted into the shadows like smoke caught in a breeze. Shaken, Jonathan stumbled back to the inn. The image of those hollow eyes burned into his mind. He barred his door, but sleep offered no escape. The whispering had followed him. It echoed inside his room now, a constant, insidious murmur. And when he glanced at the dark pane of the window, he could have sworn he saw a pair of eyes staring back at him from the blackness of the forest. Over the next few days, Jonathan's attempts to learn about the village were met with a wall of silence. The villagers were masters of avoidance. They would talk about the weather, the harvest, anything but their past. The moment he mentioned the forest or the strange whispers, their eyes would glaze over, and the conversation would abruptly end. They were hiding something, guarding a secret with a palpable, shared fear. Only one person showed any willingness to speak. An old hunter named Elias, his face a road map of wrinkles and his hands gnarled from a lifetime in the woods. Jonathan found him by the inn's hearth one evening, nursing a mug of ale. After a long silence, Elias finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Black Hollow is cursed," he said, not looking at Jonathan, but into the flames. "Long before any of us were born, these woods were alive, not with animals, but with something else. Spirits, the old ones called them. Dark ones, they whisper, they watch, and they wait." Jonathan leaned forward, his scholarly instincts ignited. "And the villagers? How do you live with this?" Eliza's gaze finally met his eyes narrowed and serious. We survive by keeping our heads down, our doors locked, and our ears closed. We ignore the whispers, and we live by one unbreakable rule. Never, ever follow what calls you in the night. The old hunter's words were a dire warning, but to Jonathan they were an invitation. His insatiable curiosity, the very thing that defined him as a scholar, was now a dangerous compulsion. He had to know what was in that forest. That very night he would break the rule. As if on cue, the whispering returned when darkness fell. It was louder this time, more insistent. No longer a vague murmur on the wind, but a direct summons. It coiled around his thoughts, beckoning him. Lantern in hand, Jonathan left the oppressive silence of the inn and walked toward the forest's edge. With each step, the air grew colder and the ground felt heavier, as if the very soil were trying to hold him back. The trees here were different. They twisted into unnatural, grotesque shapes, their branches reaching down like skeletal fingers. Shadows writhed and danced in the periphery of his lantern light, moving with an intelligence that was not their own. Then he saw them. In the same clearing as before, the cloaked figure stood waiting, but it was not alone. From the impenetrable darkness between the trees, dozens of other shadowy shapes emerged. They were silent, motionless, a congregation of ghosts, their hollow eyes fixed on him. An unnatural cold seeped into Jonathan's bones, a freezing that came not from the night air, but from deep within his soul. One of the figures raised a long, pale hand. A voice, faint and echoing, spoke not to his ears, but directly inside his mind. It sounded almost like his own thoughts. Join us. A tremor of pure terror ran through him. He finally understood. The whispers weren't carried on the wind. They were psychic projections, insidious tendrils of thought clawing their way into his mind. Every instinct, every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn and run. But his legs wouldn't obey. He took a step forward, then another, drawn by an invisible, irresistible force. Suddenly, with a sputter, his lantern flickered and died, plunging him into absolute darkness. He was blind. The whispering crescendoed, and he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. Unseen hands brushed against his arms, his shoulders, and the chorus of whispers exploded into high-pitched, inhuman laughter that echoed from all sides and from within his own skull. Hours later, he stumbled back into the village. He didn't know how he had escaped. The inn was dark and silent. The fire in the hearth was dead. Every door in Black Hollow was shut and barred, every window dark. It was as if the entire village was holding its breath, knowing he had trespassed, terrified of what he might have brought back with him from the woods. And in the chilling silence, Jonathan Hale knew his scholarly visit was over. Now, it was a struggle for survival.